Are you getting frustrated at Dark Souls? Maybe you're looking to start it, but think it has an intimidating reputation. Perhaps you're just looking for a few basic tips to get started with. Well, what ho chaps, I'm Magical Mike and I've been in that same spot, so I'd like to share my top tips for who do just get good in Dark Souls. Timestamps are in the description and stuff like that, so leave a like if anything helps, and here we go. Number 1. Deaths happen. Don't let that stop you. You will die in this game. All of us do, we all make plenty of mistakes. Even speedrunners dedicated to mastering it still fall victim to basic enemies and mostly gravity. So relax. The sooner you accept that deaths are a part of the game, and that you can and will recover and learn from them, the sooner you'll release the stress of what you might think is a massive setback. Yeah, you might have a few thousand souls on you, maybe a few too many humanity that you don't feel comfortable risking, but just relax and don't worry about losing them. You'll find that you won't miss them very much anyway, even if you do. In my experience, I treat my souls that I gain while exploring areas as kind of a bonus. Maybe I'll get a level or two the next time I find a bonfire, but nothing like that is particularly game-changing. Most of your levels will come from beating bosses, and at that point you might well have a way to reach a bonfire quite safely, maybe through items like homeward bones or because you've already cleared the path backwards, but often they'll just give you a bonfire after a boss anyway. And if you do die and manage to lose that bloodstain, well, it's no problem, you'll manage. I've been there too, and it really isn't a big deal in the long run. Remember that you made it to that point without those levels in the first place, so you can definitely do it again. Number 2. Kindle those bonfires. This is something even I forget to do a lot of the time. I almost forgot to even put it in this video at first. You can kindle a bonfire to increase the amount of Estus you get when you rest at it. Yeah, it seems quite obvious how having 5 or more extra heals with you could be more helpful, right? If you don't know how to kindle, just have some humanity stocked, reverse your hollowing at a bonfire, and then use the kindle option while in human form. Yeah, it's a little unintuitive, but now you have more Sunny D. Great! You can be invaded by players while you're in human form, so if you don't want that, then play offline, or just yeet yourself off the nearest cliff. It's no big deal. So, if you do find a particularly rough section, just kindle the flame there if you think that will help. Number 3. Stamina management and animation commitment. That little green bar you start off with might just be the most important thing in the game after your health. Everything you do requires stamina: attacking, blocking, dodge rolling, sprinting, jumping, kicking, and parrying. Try to take these actions more slowly to allow time for your stamina bar to recover between actions, and focus more on playing defensively in order to learn when it's safe to attack an enemy. Attacking in Dark Souls is slow, and you're committed to the animation if you press the attack button. You can't cancel out of an attack to dodge an enemy or any incoming damage, so make sure that you're aware of how much time you'll need to swing your weapon. You also might have noticed that spamming a button, like rolling or attacking, can create a queuing effect, making you attack, roll or use an item one more time than you might have wanted to. To avoid this, what we call input buffering, which might force your character to take that poorly timed action, try to spam buttons a bit less. You'll find that since you do fewer actions, you'll put yourself in sketchy situations much less often, meaning that enemies will be much less likely to punish you as you recover from those animations that lock you in place. You'll also find that you'll use less stamina overall. The reason this is important is because it's your main defense against enemy attacks. You think that would be armor, but no, armor can only reduce damage, but blocking or dodging can nullify it entirely, and that takes timing and stamina. A good shield with 100% physical resistance on it will be able to block all but the most powerful attacks in the game, apart from magic, at the cost of chunks of stamina. Many normal enemies will also bounce off your shield after hitting it and leave themselves open to attacks. So if you're able to retaliate after blocking an enemy, being careful with your stamina bar in the process, you'll be able to whittle anything down like that. You'll be surprised at what can be blocked too. A lot of boss attacks can be withstood like this, but take into account your stamina and your shield's stability stat, or else those super huge attacks might just flatten you anyway. Probably best not to try blocking the Gaping Dragon, for example. If you don't already have a decent early game shield, you can buy the heater shield from the merchant in Undead Burg, or kill the shield hollows there for a hollow soldier shield drop. It's not the best, but it's a pretty good early game. Another tip would be to lower your shield whenever you can. Raising it is almost instant, but keeping it up slows down your stamina recovery, so make sure to lower your shield whenever it's safe so you can recover that lost stamina. Honestly, using a shield is what I'd recommend to most newer players, but if you want to dodge instead, it is considered the more rewarding way of avoiding damage and preserving stamina, therefore allowing you to attack more often. Also, personally, it just feels more fun to do that. Rolling gives you full invulnerability during the first few frames after pressing the button, so it's capable of avoiding just about anything as long as it's well timed. I should also point out that if you're dodging, then it's almost always safer to dodge into an attack rather than away from it. The less time you spend with your character intersecting with a damaging hitbox of an enemy, the less likely you are to receive damage. As such, if you're rolling with an attack, it's more likely that you'll run out of invulnerability, or iframes, while still touching the hitbox, and as a result, take damage. However, if you're using heavy equipment, you'll notice that your roll is what we call a fat roll. It's slow and it takes ages to recover from, leaving you completely vulnerable after those initial invulnerability frames. If you're determined to make use of rolls, I suggest using lighter armour, or even going naked, but still keeping a shield handy to bolster your defences too if you're not quite confident on those dodge timings yet. And if you're determined to keep that heavy stuff for fashion souls, then make sure rolls are an absolute last resort option until you have enough endurance to improve your roll speed. So to summarise all of that stuff, slow things down, try using a good shield, stop spamming buttons, and keep an eye on your stamina. Only attack your enemy when you're confident that you have enough time to do some damage and recover enough stamina to avoid or block whatever damage is coming next. Basically, just don't get greedy. This is Souls 101. Number 4. Observe your enemy, the environment, and learn how to exploit them. Loads of enemies are different, and every new encounter can pose an entirely new challenge to you. Not sure what these guys are going to do? Well, take it slow. If you're using a shield, focus entirely on defending yourself, and learn those animations. Almost all the time you're going to be able to block their damage, so if you're not using any stamina to attack, you can really slow the pace down and take that time to learn whatever new attacks are happening and when it's safe to counterattack. The game usually allows you to learn what enemies can do in a one-on-one situation, and as you progress through an area, you'll be presented with more complex encounters. Maybe there'll be more enemies at once, maybe the safe ground will be smaller, maybe some projectiles will be added in, but most of the time you can still take things slow. Most of the time. Sometimes the best approach is to rush in, but by that time you'll be able to intuit that sort of thing in any given situation. But hey, if you were wrong, then just remember the first tip. Deaths happen, and it's just an opportunity to learn from it and make a different tactical approach when you come back next time. You can't always predict an ambush, but sometimes you can. The second part of this tip is the environment itself. Maybe there's enemies that are out of reach, maybe there's hazardous ground or pitfalls, or maybe it's just confusing to navigate. There's a lot of areas in the game where you're pushed out of your comfort zone and into less accommodating spaces. Places where movement might be restricted might challenge you if you're focused on rolling to avoid damage, for example. If you can, try to take note of any cover that you can take from projectiles, anywhere enemies might funnel towards you to pick them off one by one, or other natural advantages that you can take. And if there's nothing for it, then it might be time to go on the offensive or look for alternate routes entirely. It's also worth searching for shortcuts. Dark Souls level design is highly praised for including many shortcuts throughout the game. A lot of these skip a few tougher encounters, many of them skip large portions of areas that test your endurance, and mostly they'll just make running back through areas a lot easier. So keep an eye out when exploring, it really isn't too bad once you start finding those shortcuts. Number 5. Explore more. Try new weapons, items, and even areas. If all else fails, maybe you could just take a different route. At the start of the game, many players find themselves being horribly spooked by the skeletons in the graveyard and discover it's quite a wake-up call in difficulty. The reason here is just that it's a hint that it's a later game area. If you find yourself struggling somewhere, consider that there might just be an alternate route or a totally different area that you might be more confident trying out instead. Let go of that sunk cost of trying to struggle through this one direction and consider abandoning the current area. Just because you've made it so far in the first place that you're struggling with, it doesn't really mean that you should continue beating your head against it if you're not having fun. Maybe even just take a break. But if you're like myself and quite stubborn about it, just try looking elsewhere instead. As I said, there are plenty of shortcuts in the game, making getting back to this point probably not as bad as you would think, and since you've done it before, you know you can draw from that experience and make it back here again. You could even try a new weapon. You've probably picked up quite a few at this point. There might be all kinds of movesets that can be found on something that you haven't really tried yet that might even suit your playstyle better. Spears are great in tight corridors because you won't bounce off the walls when you swing them. Great swords are satisfying to cleave enemies with, straight swords are great all-rounders, and have you tried a bow at all? Bows themselves aren't great damage, I wouldn't really suggest using one as a main weapon, but they are a handy tool to have in your arsenal. If you've played games before, you might know about the term pulling. Using a bow or a ranged item like throwing knives or firebombs, you can grab the attention of some enemies without getting closer to them. In fact, using this technique, you can often pull some enemy groups apart entirely, separating them and making those encounters much smaller, or moving them away from a dangerous spot in terrain, and therefore making them a lot easier to deal with. Some people might call this cheesy, but forget that, that's nonsense. It's a legitimate tactic, and if you're okay with it, then just abuse it as much as you'd like. There's even items designed specifically for this purpose, the alluring skulls, and these tools and mechanics are there to help you through the game, so don't feel bad about using them. Number 6. Understanding equipment. This is my last early game tip because it delves into stuff that's much less important than you might think. It could be easy to look at a bunch of stats and come to the conclusion that your gear sucks or that you just need to level up more, instead of learning from your mistakes and adapting your playstyle. However, it is still important to learn what stats do in order to understand your equipment and your character, so let's talk about them. At any point in a menu, you can press back or select or whatever the PC equivalent is to highlight parts of the UI and have the game give you tooltips to explain what a stat type is. While that's a useful thing to know, there's still a mess of information to digest, so I'll quickly mention some important bits to check. For weapons, you'll want to pay attention to the Rec Param and Param bonus stats. These tell you how much strength, dexterity, intelligence and faith you need to wield a weapon effectively, and the bonus tells you how well it scales in damage with those stats, giving you a good indication of what stats to level your character in if you want to use that weapon. You can also see how much physical and magical damage it would currently do, and finally how heavy the weapon is might also be important to note. For shields, you'll also see required stats to use them, but your important things to note here are the damage reduction percent numbers and the stability stat. Higher damage reduction is better, 100% being a reduction to 0 damage in that type if you block with that shield, and higher stability is better, consuming less stamina to block attacks. One final character stat to take note of is poise, which is the ability to receive attacks without being interrupted whilst taking an action. You'll find this stat is on armour, usually the heavier stuff has more poise, and the higher the better. As for levelling up, try not to level anything above the soft cap of 40 unless it's required to actually use something. Pick strength or dexterity based on your weapon of choice and how it scales, which might also mean both strength and dex. Grab as much endurance as you need to expand your stamina bar and your roll speed, as much vitality as you feel comfortable with for extra health, and don't mess with attunement, faith or intelligence unless you're making a spellcaster build. A bonus tip here, don't level resistance, ever. It's entirely worthless in Dark Souls 1. It has no reason to really exist, honestly. And that just about covers things, I think. So to summarise, chill out about losing progress, souls and dying in the game. It's a learning experience. None of us were instantly able to beat this stuff without seeing the "you died" screen, so just chill. Kindle those bonfires at tricky sections. Manage your stamina. Don't spam your attacks unless it's safe to do so. Make sure that you have enough stamina to block or dodge incoming attacks, and don't commit to an animation unless you can do so safely. That includes healing. Watch enemy animations, take things as slowly as you need to, and learn when best to take your chances. Explore everything. Be curious. Ask yourself questions like, what's over there, or should I try this? And then use that gained knowledge to strategize and gain advantages in the upcoming situations. Check every new item that you pick up, be it weapons, keys, upgrade materials, or literally whatever else. Anything. There's plenty of things the game offers you to help you find a comfortable way to play. And finally, don't level resistance. But the real final tip is to actually try and have fun with the game. If you really don't enjoy Dark Souls, and none of these tips help you to do so, then there's no shame in saying that it's just not for you. Video games, after all, are meant to be fun, and challenge is just one of the many aspects of fun for those of us that do enjoy challenge. I'm Magical Mike, and hopefully I've helped you out. So go forth and praise the sun, and thanks for watching.